crowd up here. Set it up, Dave.
That be the cry of our hearts today. Our only hope is Jesus. Lord, help us to run this race with endurance and perseverance for the cause of Christ, for your glory, for the good of your people, for the good of the world. Lord, we love you and thank you for all that you've done for us in Christ. Thank you for the cross and the resurrection, which our hope holds to. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right, they're going to be, Brian Shrank's going to be introducing State Rep.
Thank you, brother, for leading us in worship this morning again. My name is Brian, and I get the honor of introducing my good friend and brother in the Lord, State Representative John Jacob. And I'll give you a little cliff notes of what kind of transpired in the last year and a half to get John in the position that the Lord has raised him up in. How many of you know that it was not an accident that John was elected? It was God who put John in office.
Yes, amen.
Amen. So in October 2019, I found out that the state representative in John's district, and John's in District 93, which is South Marion County, Southport area, and it goes into Johnson County, or like northwestern Greenwood, so kind of in that vicinity. We found out after 27 years the state representative retired, and he actually retired mid-session, and they appointed someone in his place. And I came to John in October 2019 and his wife Angie, and I asked them, hey, would you guys prayerfully consider about running? And what they did was they immediately started to pray and fast and seek God's guidance. About a month later or so, John told me and Angie that they felt led of the Lord to run. And so we kicked off his campaign starting in January 2020. And by God's grace and his grace alone, John actually defeated the Republican incumbent by 71 votes.
Amen. Praise the Lord.
The election, yes, praise God. The election was that close. And if I remember correctly, John was the only outsider to knock out a Republican incumbent in the primary there. So many of you have been following John through this process. The legislative session just ended on Thursday here, and we're very thankful that John is taking time out to speak with us and kind of share a legislative update of what happened at the State House this year. So, Brother John, can you come here? And you guys give John a round of applause. And I will say this before I have him speak here. The Lord raised up John. I call him the State House prophet. John's been preaching the gospel. He's been pleading with our legislators to abolish abortion for the last 5 legislative sessions. All right, this man is the real deal. He is the best evangelist I've ever known, and he is one of the godliest men that I know as well. I love him to death, and I know you will be blessed as he shares his heart with you. So again, one more time, welcome John Jacob.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. I really am truly grateful for the outpouring of love and everybody being out here today. Forgive me with this speaker. I really hate public speaking, so you'll have to forgive me. What's that? A little bit. Yeah. Great. Thank you. This is my wife, Angie Jacob. Exactly, because I don't say this with any amount of, I wouldn't be standing up here if it wasn't for her. I wouldn't be in office if it wasn't for her. I know that a lot of people see my face, and I'm the one who's in the State House and everything else, and you'll have to forgive me if I get emotional because I'm trying to really unplug from the session because of a lot of things that have happened. So I'm going to try to keep it together, and I'm trying to just unplug from everything that has occurred over the last 4 months. But had my wife not been with me, when Brian talked about us praying, my wife and I talked extensively about what it would mean with us running. I run my own business. We do ministry. We've done ministry in Indianapolis very unassumingly for years. You know, you give I'm really not saying anything differently than I've done for years.
Amen.
Except now my platform has become bigger to be able to be, I guess, the loudmouth I think that God has called me to be. I try to shut my mouth and it doesn't work. But again, I can't say enough about my wife. I can't say enough because, again, I wouldn't be here. And first and foremost, though, I do want to give God the glory. It is through Him that I'm standing here. It is through the people that He's raised up around me that I'm here. And I have not even had a chance really to absorb everything that happened in the legislative session. So you'll have to forgive me if things seem a little bit fragmented, because I've not been able to take everything and distill it out on paper, because that's what I'm going to have to do over the next few weeks and try to figure out where I'm going to go from here. But I'm going to try as best as I can to try to explain the legislative process. Some of you may be familiar with the legislative process. Some of you may not. I want to give that background. I want to give a little bit more background to myself and why Brian had asked me to run, why we needed another legislator in there, not just one, but multiple. No, because I could use my phone, so. I want to thank my campaign team. Brian Schrank and Barry Atwell, who's seated here. These two are my campaign managers. Other people that were on my political campaign team. Pastor Kip, his mom was our campaign treasurer. There are a lot of rules regarding campaign finance, I'll tell you. and she kept everything above board so that we could have everything filed correctly, filed on time, and she was a godsend. Aaron Francis, Michael Swengel, Luke Campbell, I didn't see anybody else, and Darren Stead, who came along afterwards. There are other people that are on that was my campaign team. There were other people that were on my political team, and the political team was different than my campaign team, because my political team was that group of people that I consulted with throughout the legislative process every week, and throughout the week as legislation was coming up, we were just over and over trying to review that legislation to figure out what we needed to do. Sorry. So, I want to talk about the session. This year was a budget year. It was a little bit longer than what we typically do. The typical session ends sometime about mid-March. This one obviously ended just this past Thursday. And the reason is because we do the budget every 2 years. And so in a budget year, we can actually draft, each legislator, each representative can actually draft 10 bills to submit into committee. That's the maximum. We can co-author as many bills as we want to. When those bills are introduced, and I don't want to go through a lot of the details, but I want at least you to understand the legislative flow. Those bills are introduced and assigned to committees. Those committees have about 12 to 14 people on the committee, other representatives. They review the legislation that comes into those committees, and then once they do that, if it wins by majority vote, essentially, it comes out of the committee and then it comes out onto the House chamber floor to be heard and then hopefully voted on. Every single one of my bills died in committee. Every single one of the bills that Representative Kurt Nisley, how many of you know Kurt Nisley? If you do, raise your hand. Okay. Every single one of his bills died in committee. Representative Kurt Nisley has been laboring for the last 6 years. He just got reelected for the 4th time. And I've talked about people that I'm thanking, but you know what? I want to thank Representative Kurt Nisley and his wife, Mary Nisley. And I know Kurt would echo the same words for his wife that I just did for my wife. Kurt has been laboring for 6 years in there as a Lone Ranger. And honestly, we owe a great debt of gratitude to Kurt Knisley. He has endured a lot of abuse. And I understand that this video footage is going to go out to my fellow colleagues, my other representatives who are going to see this. He has endured a lot of abuse, and yes, abuse. He has been abused, and he deserves a lot of apology from the establishment. And I'm going to be very vocal about that, because I get a firsthand view to what Kurt has had to endure for the last 6 years.
8 down.
Kurt needed a second on the floor. And what that means is when a bill comes up on the floor, essentially, when you bring legislation up on the floor, if you amend a bill, if we write legislation, bills come up on the floor. I'm going to back up. When bills come up on the floor, let's say bill number 1, let's say it's a hospital bill. If you want to amend that bill and put in legislation that's related to that bill, you can write an amendment. And any legislator can do that. Any representative can write that amendment and have it tacked on to that bill. And then that author of that amendment can bring that amendment up on the floor once the bill is brought up on the floor. If the author of the bill does not bring up their bill, then you can't bring up your amendment. And so when you bring up your amendment, the first thing they're going to ask you is for a second. They're going to ask if anybody has any motions. You're going to make a motion to have your amendment heard. If you don't have a second, your amendment dies. It cannot be heard. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that everything that Kurt Knisley has been trying to do, he's been doing this without a second. He's been doing it without a representative who will second him. So 1 can put 1,000 to flight, but 2 can put 10,000 to flight. And with Kurt and I were able to tag team to be able to bring up legislation. I could bring up things, he could bring up things, he could bring up amendments, and we could second each other on that legislation. And that's what we did over and over and over in this legislative process. We knew that our bills were going to die in committee. We knew that our bills would not get a hearing, even though they were righteous and good legislation. There are forces in Indiana, and yes, obviously spiritual forces, because we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. And let's remember, and as I've declared to the other House of the Reps and the senators, and that is that Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords right now. Amen. And somehow or another, I think our political officials across this nation have forgotten that. I've asked the other representatives, let me ask you something. If you would say the same things that you're saying to me to shut me down, if King Jesus were sitting here, if he was sitting here in this chamber, would you say that to him? Would you say the things that you're saying from that podium to him? Would you say them in his presence because you are in his presence? I want to talk about a couple house rules. Not house rules here, but rules of the House, parliamentary procedure. I've got a lot of things. I was trying to learn this legislative session. I made a lot of mistakes, but there's 2 things that they will use, the establishment will use to try to shut you down. It's the issue of germaneness. How many of you understand the term germane, if you know what that means? Okay, so germane basically means that it's a house rule issue. It's one of the house rules. It means that if you bring up an amendment, it has to be related to the bill at hand. In other words, if there's a hospital bill, I can't sit there and bring up an amendment that talks about roads. And even if I bring up something that's related to hospitals, it has to be very, very related to the bill at hand. And so what happens is when you bring up those amendments, they will do everything they can to call your amendment out of order.
the first thing they will do when you start bringing up that amendment, so in other words, I'll bring up an amendment, and then Kurt will give me a second, or vice versa, and then what they will do is they'll say, it's out of order. And they'll say it's a germane issue, meaning that the bill, the amendment is not in relation, it's not close enough to the bill at hand. Or what they will do, the second one that they use a lot is what they call bill pending. That's another rule. And that one, they'll specifically say that if there is a bill that you've already filed into committee, you've officially filed it, you cannot take that bill and then attach it to another bill that's on the floor. And the irony of that, and I want to give you some stories along the way with some of the legislation that I introduced, and now I'll come to that in a few minutes. The irony of that is that I kept on asking, I said, what does this bill pending rule mean? Because I was getting really aggravated. They have a parliamentarian, if you ever watched the session chamber video, Mr. Speaker, Representative Todd Houston, there's a younger gentleman on his, on his left side, as you're watching. He's a parliamentarian. He knows all the parliamentarian rules. Anyway, I kept on asking the parliamentarian, I said, what does this bill pending rule mean? Because it says that you cannot introduce a bill that's pending, meaning it's in committee, or it's that you've already filed it. You can't introduce that as an amendment. And I said, it doesn't say bill in part, whole, whatever. You can't, in other words, you can't even take it partial. The rule doesn't say partial, it says bill. Well, I took some parts of other bills that I had introduced, and I had tried to amend the bills. They said, you can't do that. I said, okay. So I took certain ideas, but somehow or another, they thought they were too closely related to bills that were filed. So again, they would call us out of order. So over and over and over, we kept on trying to amend bills to put things in that were right and good. And over and over and over, they kept on calling Kurt and Isley and I out of order. Because of germaneness and because of bill pending. Anyway, I wanted you to have that backdrop as I come and I start talking about some of the amendments. That's why I have my brain with me here to my left. It is up to them as to what is germane or not. And ultimately, it is Mr. Speaker Houston, who has the final rule of what is germane or bill pending. Because when I call you out of order, by the way, although all that is on video footage, they stopped the session so that the Democrats, the Republicans, and the person that is bringing forth the legislation, i.e. Kurt or I, in that situation, we have to defend why we're saying that that is not a bill pending, or we have to explain why it is germane to the bill. The Republicans will give their side, the Democrats will give their side. Mr. Speaker will then make his decision on the issue. You as the public do not get the opportunity to see that discussion. Exactly. That was my response, Barry.
Wickedness.
Exactly, that's wickedness. It's done behind closed doors. It's taken off video. They go out of session. So I asked, I said, why? Why do you take that off session? Why is it that the people can't see what the discussion is as to why you're making the why, if you're going to make a decision, shouldn't the people be able to see what the dialogue is as to what's going on?
Yes.
I worked for government for almost 30 years as an auditor. It was calling government to account. I worked for a governmental agency. I managed and audited almost over $100 billion of government money over the last 3 decades. And the biggest issue that I had with government is their lack of transparency.
Yes.
And that issue of not being able to see what's going on is evil. So anyway, I had a further discussion with the parliamentarian about this. He recommended that I go to talk to Mr. Speaker. I've been told, make relationships. Be friendly. Work within the process. I did all those. I worked within the process. I was friendly. I get smacked down. I get representatives who would not even acknowledge me. Aside from disagreements, it was like 2-year-old antics. I went to go talk to Mr. Speaker about the issue of the lack of transparency of the discussion that was going on. He didn't want to address the issue. He kept on deflecting. I had multiple other questions about the issue of bill pending, germaneness. Again, he didn't want to address my questions. He wanted to keep on deflecting. The first one he deflected to was, John, the other representatives don't like what you're saying out on the floor. They don't like that you keep on calling abortion murder.
What it is.
Exactly, it is. And I said, Mr. Speaker, I said, you're a Christian. Him and I have talked about his relationship with Christ. Do you not believe abortion is murder? Yeah, I believe abortion is murder. What's the problem? Yes, exactly. Hello? Abortion is murder. But we're not treating it like it's murder. One of the bills that was introduced was House Bill 1577. It was another regulatory bill. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Regulating abortion. Okay. Another regulatory bill. Last year's was fetal remains. This year, their right to life bill that they introduced was the telehealth bill. And that bill would say, what essentially it said is that a woman can not call into the abortion clinic to get her abortion pills. So, as many of you that have ministered out at the abortion clinic, woman will come here for the abortion pill. She'll get the 2-stage pill. She'll take one here, and then she'll take another one about 18 hours later. This bill says that a woman can't call over the phone to get it. She has to actually come inside the abortion clinic to get it. The other thing is that the abortionist would actually have to do an imaging of the baby before she has the abortion. But any woman that has had an ultrasound, or if you're an ultrasound tech, you understand they put the wand on your stomach and they can move that thing around and it just looks like at one point it can look like a blob. At another point, it doesn't look like anything. You could twist the wand wherever you want it to be to make it look whatever you want it to look like. You're asking, and this is what I brought up in my speech on the floor on 1577, because I voted against the bill. I had others said, John, you're pro-life. How did you vote against this bill? I said, because it is, and I'm going to just pull bits and pieces from my speech that I said before I voted no on the bill. Because when I ran on my platform, I said, I am not going to regulate abortion.
Amen.
I am going to work to end abortion immediately. And I wanted to keep my promise to my constituents and to the people of the state of Indiana. I'm sick and tired of the establishment introducing regulatory bills that do nothing. We're 47 years down the road, and again, these are pieces that I pulled from my speech. 47 years down the road, 62 million children dead, murdered from abortion. We need to stop regulating abortion, and we need to end it immediately. And I told them, I said, we have the power within our hands to be able to end abortion immediately. I'm pivoting back and forth here. So back to my conversation with Mr. Speaker. This is a private conversation him and I had. It wasn't confidential, but it was just a private one that I had. He goes, John, what do you propose then? What I propose is that we do what's right.
Amen.
And what's right is that we take Representative Nisley's bill, his bill called Protection at Conception, the Life Bill, Protection of Life. It's known, I think, by 3 different names at this point. Anyway, 5th year in a row, that bill was introduced into committee, and it died. in committee. It never got a hearing, and it died. I had the privilege of being a co-author on that bill. And when I ran, I told people I was going to, when I get in, I wanted to co-author with that bill. But I told Mr. Speaker, I said, we need to pass protection at conception. And he goes, and it's going to be immediately thrown into the courts. And I said, kind of like all the regulatory bills that you guys pass every year and then go to court, and the state of Indiana spends millions of dollars to defend, kind of like that. Bills that are do-nothing bills? Seriously? You're willing to pass a bill that virtually does nothing, have it challenged in court. Why don't you aim for the bullseye? The bullseye is to end abortion. Shoot for the bullseye. I don't know anybody that goes out target practicing, sees the bullseye, and then aims out here. There's a problem if you shoot guns like that. I mean, that's how you do your target practicing. It's pretty simple. Abortion is murder. Let's end it. Mr. Speaker didn't like that, so we were walking and he had to get to another meeting. We ended the conversation. So anyway, 1577, I told him, I said, I'm not voting for this bill. It's not because I don't believe that we should preserve life. I do believe that we should preserve life. I was voting against 1577, and so that people understand is because I didn't come here to regulate abortion. I came here to end abortion. And that was what Mr. Speaker was talking about, because that was one of multiple speeches I gave on the floor about abortion is murder, we need to end it. Abortion is murder, we need to end it. And I kept on, and I just, it was a broken record. I felt like every opportunity I could get up to speak, but I had to speak only to bills that were related. In other words, I couldn't just get up on a road bill and start saying abortion is murder. I had to wait for bills that were related to find out. And the hard part was, throughout our week, was finding all the bills. What happens, they funnel out of committee, they come out onto the House floor for second readings, which is when we can amend the bill. Then we amend the bills, they go through whatever amendment process we go through, and then they come to a third reading, and then we finally take a vote on the bill, and then the bill either dies or it passes, then it goes over to the Senate, they do the same thing over there, and then it ends up going to the governor's office if it passes the Senate. So that's a quick highlight view of the entire process. You'll have to forgive me because the stack of legislation, again, I have not had the chance, yes, exactly, and that's not an understatement. I want to give a quick rundown to some of the summary bills that I introduced into committee. Some of the bills that died in committee, and then I'll get to some of the amendments that I actually did, that I tried to tack on to the existing bills. My first bill that I introduced was House Bill 1289, which was constitutional carry. Representative Nisley, a few years ago, tried to introduce constitutional carry. We got a Republican supermajority in Indiana, go figure. We don't have constitutional carry. We got all these pro-gun Republicans, right? Anyway, because Kurt Nisley had a second, amazing. There was 7 bills that were essentially constitutional carry bills that have appeared this year. Isn't that amazing? Well, anyway, needless to say, mine was the only one that was a true con carry bill, a clean con carry bill. The other ones had they had issues. I won't go into that. Anyway, there was one that ended up making its way out of the House of Representatives, went over to the Senate, and they killed it. The other one was House Bill 1503, the Religious Freedom Restoration, the RFRA. How many of you remember the RFRA issue that happened a few years ago? Okay, a few years ago there was a RFRA bill. Anyway, the governor, he got backlash because of his support of it. It ended up getting modified. Well, what it did was it ended up putting Christians and people of faith at jeopardy of being sued, and really it wasn't religious freedom, it was religious oppression. Well, it was still sitting out there, so I wanted to repeal that. That was another one that died in committee. I wanted to get elimination of straight ticket voting, and I wanted that one because we got Republicans, we got Democrats, people are, I know they're pulling the ticket, but you know what? Our state constitution talks about free and equal elections. I mean, if there's a significant bias, and you got to admit, there's some, at least from my perspective, there's a significant bias when you pull a straight ticket. Make people sit there and investigate their candidates when they're going in to vote. That's not too hard. Number 5, House Bill 1505, minors transitioning to the opposite sex. So this one was specifically on the issue of the transgenders and prohibiting doctors, medical people, family from taking minors and actually transitioning them physically. Anyway, you know what I'm saying? All the legal terms to the physical changes surgical changes that they would make to a person in transitioning them, and also the hormonal treatment that is incredibly damaging to their body, and it literally usually sterilizes them. This wasn't something that I was trying to impose. If an adult wants to sit there and if they want to do it, that's their choice. But doing that on a minor, I'm going to be flat up. It's child abuse. I'm not talking about somebody who's, Brian, help me out. When somebody is hermaphrodite. Yeah, so I'm not talking about somebody who's, physically born, which is questionable. I'm talking about just people who are normal, who are visibly a female or a male, and then you're sitting there trying to transition them to the other sex. The other one is House Bill 1506. And by the way, I'm not smart enough to come up with all this legislation. The people on my political and my campaign team, the people that I just mentioned, we collectively came up with this legislation trying to figure out what do we want to what do we want to draft, and then what do we want to introduce into committee, because that was a whole strategy that we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with each of those bills. Anyway, House Bill 1506 was fostering and adoption immunization waivers, and specifically this was meant to the foster care rolls in Indiana are bursting. There are so many kids in foster care that are not able to be adopted or fostered into loving homes, and specifically so many families that are not wanting to get immunized, and because they are not immunized, they're not allowed to foster. And all I was saying is that they should be able to have a waiver that if they are, for whatever reason, do not want to have an immunization, they should not be prevented from fostering. And plus, if the child has already been immunized, why is the family being penalized for that? Doesn't make sense to me. The next one was House Bill 1517, which was defining adjusted gross income. That one wasn't really. Was that yours, Barry?
No.
Or was that Luke's? I think it was Luke's.
Yeah.
So this one, we would actually define adjusted gross income as being only the income that you earn as a government employee. Anything else was not income. We needed to have some fun in the process here too. But seriously, I mean, I wanted to be able to reduce taxes. We tried to come up with creative ways to do that. Another one was House Bill 1518. They had introduced a previous bill, and I can't remember the year, so you'll have to forgive me on they made a tiered system where they were increasing your fuel tax incrementally each year.
Is that how y'all were going to try to get rid of?
You know, instead of dropping an 8 or
I voted
10% tax increase, you know, they'll do it like 1 or 2% per year, so you don't notice it as much. So I wasn't even asking a repeal all the way back to the original. I was just asking a repeal back to the previous year and to put a cap and to say no more. It wasn't a huge, I mean, it really wasn't a huge issue, but I mean, I felt like it was something that we could do for the citizens of the state of Indiana. Again, it died in committee. I did multiple resolutions, you know, for awards for people within my district. I still need to get those out to the people. I don't want to go through those. House Concurrent Resolution 2, 4, and I believe it was 15. Those were authored by Representative Curtin Isley. Those resolutions would have ended the governor's emergency order related to COVID. Representative Curtin Isley, I was co-author on those, and also Representative Borders, and was Zach? Okay, I think there may have been one other that went on and then they pulled themselves off. Anyway, we had to reintroduce each one because the governor was renewing his order every 30 days, and every time he renewed the order, we had to renew the resolution with the up-to-date language. You know, basically, you know, because resolutions basically say, whereas, and it starts giving as all these whereases, saying all these facts, and then at the end of it, it asks for the action item that you're asking. What we were asking was that we were asking for an end, essentially, to the governor's emergency order. And it was already written into the law that if the legislature, by concurrent resolution, wanted to end the governor's emergency, we could do that. That's why we introduced a concurrent resolution, because we were trying to follow the process. And again, over and over, I'm going to go back and I'm going to default to this, because Representative Nisley, for 6 years, he doesn't follow the process. Curtin Isley followed the process. He follows the process. You know, but what? You know what? They like to follow the process, use it to their advantage. But when we follow the process and we use it to our full advantage, they don't like it. And then they start dogging us for it, and they start smacking us down for it. The goal, we knew that our resolution was not going to get a hearing. We knew that it was not going to be heard in the committee. But the goal was to have another legislator to actually introduce their own resolution. We were just fine with somebody else having a concurrent resolution by which it would be pushed forward. And Representative J.D. Prescott, he introduced House Concurrent Resolution 18. It mirrored our resolution, except it talked about the vaccines also. Anyway, there was about 30 other representatives that went on as co-authors on HCR 18, on J.D. Prescott's. I'm sorry? 35, great, sorry. 35 ended up being on that resolution. Curtin Isley and myself were asked, why don't you get on that resolution, since they're not giving your resolution the time of day? Why don't you get on HCR 18? It's like, we knew where it was going to go, but we thought, okay, we will. We were going to work within the process. We're going to work with people, because people say we don't work with people. Yes, we do. We work within the process. We try to work with people when it's right. When it's right. And that was an over and over issue that I said with people within the General Assembly. Do not expect me to sit there and negotiate with you when something starts falling outside of the boundaries of the Constitution or is sin. It is not my responsibility to negotiate with you when you start, because to negotiate with sin just a little bit is sin in and of itself, right? Anyway, we went to J.D. Prescott. We thought we'll try to work with him. J.D., can we be on HCR 18? Both Kurt and I got the same response. No, Kurt, no, John, because we've already been told that if you guys go on, there are other representatives that have said they'll take their name off. Yeah, that's the kind of over and over stuff that we had to deal with. It wasn't a one-time issue. This is over and over stuff that we were dealing with.
It really needs some
I
adult
co-authored
supervision.
on another bill it was establishing a commission on election integrity. House Bill 1538. Student protection and digital resources. I worked with Purple for Parents, Rhonda Miller, Jennifer McWilliams, if some of you know that name. We were trying to introduce legislation to prevent pornography in our schools. Going through the whole IT process and everything else, and working through the contractors who established the IT processes. Let me just say this. IT is an ongoing process. You don't just set things in motion. It needs ongoing maintenance. And there was opportunity, much opportunity for children, students to be able to access pornography through the school's resources. We were asking for more stringent rules to be able to protect children. We went and talked with, I won't mention the representative's name. Anyway, he was the committee chairman over this bill to try to get this bill heard. Kurt authored it, I co-authored. Again, the bill died. They did, I am pleased though, they did take the language. It wasn't as strong as what we had, but they did introduce it into another bill. It essentially makes a statement of trying to prevent pornography from getting in, but I had a lot of questions about making sure that there was compliance. How do you ensure that compliance is actually occurring? How do you monitor it? Because as many of you may well know, when you establish a government program, the bottom line is you have to have monitoring. You have to figure out whether or not what you're intending is actually implemented. I want to deviate back to House Concurrent Resolution 15 and 18, which would have ended the governor's executive emergency order. We wanted to work within the process. Work within the process. They say, go and talk to so-and-so. If you're going to get a bill introduced, or if you're going to get legislation introduced, they would say, go talk to the committee chairman, or go talk to the author on the bill. Representative Dan Leonard, who is a committee chairman, whom some of you may have been calling because Brian has done a marvelous job of blowing up my social media page and getting the word out on a lot of issues. We went to Representative Leonard, again, the committee chairman that presides over House Concurrent Resolution 15 and House Concurrent Resolution 18, because the committee chairman ultimately, aside from other voices that are speaking behind him and pressuring him, has the final say as to whether or not a bill dies in committee. There's no vote. The committee chairman has absolute power as to whether legislation goes forward or dies in their committee. Exactly. Boo. That is a lot of power. Anyway, we talked with Representative Leonard. We tried to get him to have House Concurrent Resolution 15 or 18 heard. We didn't care which one it was. We just wanted one of them pushed forward. He finally got mad at us because we had put his phone number out on the social media page, and he was mad because he was getting phone calls from angry voters.
Good.
I had people on the social media page. I'm calling, but nobody's returning my phone call. Nobody's telling me, yeah, we're going to do this or we're not going to do it or whatever, or just some response back. I know from your vantage point, when you're making phone call after phone call after phone call and email after email after email, and you hear nothing, know this, it's doing something. It's like when you take a sledgehammer and you hit a big rock and you keep on hitting it. Man, it's not cracking, but it's doing something. And you crack it long, and you hit it long enough, it's going to crack. And I'm going to get to some of those cracks here in a few minutes. Representative Leonard does not like getting phone calls from angry voters.
What's his number?
What's that?
What's his number?
I don't know offhand. Anyway, Representative Nisley and myself were walking out of the office, and we said, oh, we learned something today. Representative Leonard does not like phone calls. At the end of the meeting, because he was very angry about that, he had kept his composure pretty well through the meeting, but at the end of the meeting, he blew up. And then he said, and he goes, and we're not going to hear the DAM resolution. That was his final word on HCR 18 and 15. That's what he thought of Hoosiers in the state of Indiana that wanted an end to the emergency order.
What's his district?
I'm not sure offhand, Barry. I'm doing a good job just to be able to know all their names at this point.
He's a challenger.
Brian Schrank, he's done a marvelous job with the social media page. I cannot rave enough. But specifically on the issue of HCR 18, although those representatives put their name on HCR 18, we put HCR 15, Representative Nisley and myself, we profiled that over and over and over on our social media page. We did everything we could to get it out to people so that they were aware of it. The other representatives on HCR 18 that put their name on there, they put their name on it, and that was it. It wasn't being profiled on their social media pages. It wasn't getting out there. You get my drift. They signed off on it. Oh, I did it. I signed off on it. The only reason HCR 18 ultimately got exposure was because Representative Nisley and Brian, working my social media page, ended up getting profile after profile on HCR 18 out there. We thought it would be best to go with HCR 18 because it had so many representatives on it. And if it was going to carry any weight, it would be that. I also co-authored on HCR 9, directing the Congress of the U.S. to propose to the several states an amendment to the U.S. Constitution concerning the membership of the United States Supreme Court. In other words, not to expand the Supreme Court. Thank you. I also I have a lot of Burmese in my district, and I'm really concerned about what's going on in Burma. If you're familiar with the military junta there and their brutality and taking over the political powers there have taken, they were elected in, and this has been an ongoing issue, and the military took over the country, and they have put the duly elected political officials in prison. And they've just been slaughtering people that when they've been speaking out about it. I just did a concurrent resolution to try to appeal to the White House to put political pressure on the junta, on the military junta in Burma, so that to cast light on it. Because the military junta in the past has not liked when exposure has been shown on them, and they've backed off. And Anyway, I spent over 6 weeks trying to get that through the process because I was working through the process. I over and over kept on. What do I need to do? What action items do I need to press? What do I need to do to make sure this gets through the process? 6 weeks later, literally 2 or 3 days before we're about to end session this week, oh, your resolution is going to be assigned to a committee. In other words, it was a word to say, your resolution is going to go to the elephant graveyard to die. I was ticked. And I let the clerical office, I said, look, I said, I know it's not your fault, but I know that there are other powers here that decided to take that resolution and stick it in there. They said, well, you can do it next year. I said, oh, okay. I said, tell that to the people in Burma as they're dying here for the next year. Well, you can do something else. You know what? God put me in this platform. This is the place, this is the most effective place I feel like I have right now to be able to put my voice out there to help. I didn't know what else I could say. I just said, you know what? I said, I'm really upset. This is really bogus. I really like Kurt Knisley. I didn't know Kurt very well before this, and Kurt and I, and Mary, his wife, and my wife, we've all been closely working together. And I just want to say I really, really like Kurt Knisley. Kurt Knisley is a man of integrity. And I'm really sick and tired. I get really sick and tired of the slander that I hear from the establishment about Kurt. He's my friend, and I really hate when I hear the stuff that I hear coming out from them. It really bugs me. I guess as Forrest Gump said, that's all I got to say about that. How many of you are familiar with Baby Rivers?
Oh, yeah.
All right, Baby Rivers. We had amended, I won't even go through all the bills. There was multiple bills that came through that were medical, hospital. I'm gonna back. I'll talk about Baby Rivers and I'll come back to something else related. We kept on looking at bills, again, that were related. Keep in mind, again, we were having to watch each day as bills were coming out of committee onto the next stage, which is what they call second reading in the House floor. And we would literally get about a 24-hour, it would be coming out that day. We would have to review the bills usually that evening, figure out what we're going to do, draft legislation, work with Legislative Services Agency to draft that legislation. We'd have to review it, make sure it was okay, because there was multiple times that we tried to draft legislation that wasn't what we intended. You only have a certain timetable to file that legislation. A lot of times Kurt and I were reviewing legislation late into the night, and a lot of times through the night, in the middle of the night, working with Legislative Services Agency to get the legislation right. And then we would have about 3 hours before session begins in the morning. So if it starts at 10 a.m., we had to be at what they call the Republican bubble, the clerical office, to sign off on the amendment, to make it official, to attach it to the bill. Baby Rivers was one of those that we wanted to attach. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Baby Rivers. Baby Rivers was about 3 or 4 years ago up northern Indiana, Muncie area. Muncie Hospital, Ball State Hospital, Ball Memorial. Baby Rivers' mom was starting to go into labor, I think at like 21, 22 weeks. She did everything she could to desperately try to not deliver her baby before 24 weeks, because Indiana law says that if the baby is born before 24 weeks, they don't have to give any care to the baby. They can let the baby die. And so she was desperately trying to get to 24 weeks so that her baby would be able to get the care if her baby was born premature? Well, baby Rivers was born 3 days shy of 24 weeks. Baby Rivers was born healthy, breathing, and baby Rivers' parents had to hold their baby for the next few hours as their baby died. The hospital refused to give any care to their baby. They refused to transfer their baby to another hospital for neonatal care. I use my hands a lot. Existing abortion statute is in Indiana Code 16. In that statute, it says that if an abortion is performed and a baby is born alive after a failed abortion, they have to give care to the baby. Exactly. All we tried to do was to take that same legislation that was in the abortion code, and we wanted to make it consistent, and we went to the hospital code, and we attached it in the hospital code, and we just said, look, if a baby born from an abortion is going to get care that's born prematurely, because of a failed abortion, shouldn't a baby that's just born prematurely, shouldn't that baby receive care? And the bottom line is that any baby that's born should be able to receive that care. If the baby dies, the baby dies. I mean, that's in God's hands. But any baby that's born, I think I've seen some as early as 16, 17 weeks, maybe earlier, I don't know, but I think I've seen some as early as 16 or 17 weeks. 20? The 20 is the earliest? Okay, all right. But either way, we were just asking the hospital code to mirror the abortion code. I don't see how that was unreasonable. We did everything we could to try to attach that to different bills that were germane. In other words, they were related. We found bills that were very related. And over and over and over, we were called out of order. They stopped the session, and they would say they were going to withdraw our amendment because they said it was not germane. So finally, Kurt and I did something else. Here's another house rule, part of the process, working the process, right? They told us, make sure you work through the process. We're going to work through the process. One of those is something that they hate. We didn't do it to be spiteful. We did it because we believed it was right. And it's called the challenge of the ruling of the chair. So in other words, I want to make this one really clear. I'm going to plumb out the details. So as I talked about, you have an amendment. We took a Baby River amendment. We attached it to a bill. We called it up. We made our speech on the amendment, and then we made a motion and a second to call for a roll call vote. They didn't want to go on record. They didn't want to go on record. Exactly, Boo. So what they do is they immediately call you out of order. That's how they stop the vote. That's how they stop so that they don't go on record. They don't like to be on record for those things that they don't want to vote for.
Right.
So there's another part of the process where you can have a challenge on the ruling of the chair. So Mr. Speaker comes back up, we have our debate back and forth, and then he comes back up, and the out of order, I can't. Yeah, it stands. So in other words, he's saying that you were ruled out of order. I agree. He's saying I agree with that. We decided to challenge the ruling of the chair. So in other words, we just literally say we challenge the ruling of the chair, and then one of us seconds, and that's what we did. The Speaker of the House then has to step down from the podium. He's not allowed to preside over the assembly at that point because of the issue at hand. Because we're calling into question the integrity of his decision. And I can tell you this, I was really taken aback. Because Mr. Speaker, when they moved us from the House chamber into the Government Center South, aside from our disagreements and everything else, I don't take my personal feelings and act, I feel like, in a rude way to other people. As many of you that are close to me know me, I'm a loudmouth. Yes, I'm very vocal. I ask God for love and grace and boldness. But when we did the ruling of the chair, Mr. Speaker came down, and he just glared. He had his bottlenecks. He has to come back down around. He literally had to pass right past us, and he was just glaring at us like, how dare you? I was really, really taken aback. I was like, wow, you really, in my mind I was thinking, you really think you hold that much power? I was really, honestly, I'm a freshman legislator. I was really stunned. Maybe I'm naive. They have another speaker, they have backups. He then steps up. And then what they do is we called for a roll call vote with that ruling of the chair. So in other words, the bill at hand, the amendment at hand, although they struck down the roll call vote for that amendment, now we're dealing with the challenge of the ruling of the chair in relationship to that amendment. We called for a roll call vote for that. So at least if our amendment for Baby Rivers was not going to be voted on, we were going to get at least everybody in that house on record as to whether or not they upheld the ruling of the chair or they were against it. And praise God, we had a few that actually stood with us. And believe me, they caught a lot of flack from the establishment. They caught it. Yeah, it was. So yes, and I want to say, yes, I won't mention the other representative. He's a good friend. We're very glad. He knew it was right. I'll just say it that way. I won't go into other detail to honor his other things that he said, but just to say he knew that it was right. We did that on another one. We did a challenge of the ruling on the chair on another bill. Anyway, and I'm going to try to kind of wrap this up so I'm not going on and on and on here. Baby Rivers, because it was brought to light, because after that, Brian did a tremendous job of profiling it, and so did Representative Nisley. But yes, with the petitions, with the challenge of the ruling of the chair, the establishment was trying to say, well, that wasn't really voting on the amendment. We were just voting on the challenge of the ruling of the chair. This had nothing to do with Baby Rivers.
Man.
And we were trying to explain to people, yes, it did.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. So finally, there are multiple ways that they can put legislation along the process. So don't ever let them snow you to say, oh yeah, that's dead. You can't introduce that. If they want something done, they can get it done. I've watched over and over where they can backdoor something at the last minute and they can put it somewhere. And this is where I'm gonna go with Baby Rivers. Baby Rivers, in this process where Brian was putting it out on social media and everybody was calling angry voters, and you know how much legislators love angry voters, right? They introduced it on Senate Bill 325. They found a place to actually not take our amendment, but one of the other representatives authored the language. They authored, not to me, this other representative authored the language, attached on there. Great, that's what we wanted. We wanted that. And then in that process, we heard that they were just going to literally strip that bill out and take the language out again. In the Senate. So this wasn't a House bill, it is now a Senate bill. We're having to work fast because if the bill dies, the bill's gone. So we were putting it out on social media and everything. You guys were calling. They ended up attaching it, like we found it hours before they had took it and put it into another House bill that had been circulated. Anyway, they were bouncing back and forth between the House and the Senate. Ended up being put in, I think, to House Bill 1421. Was it? Was it 05? Okay, sorry, 1405. All the numbers are getting jumbled with me in my head. In the midst of session, I get a text message from my legislative assistant, and he says, "Hey, sir, Senator Bush, Justin Bush, called and he wanted you to call him." Okay, who did I make mad now? All right, so I told him, I said, okay, well, we're going to be probably at another half hour, so I said, I'll wait and I'll give him a call. So get out of session, we broke, and this last week, they have a certain number of hours they have to break between conference committee reports, so they would introduce them, have them heard, they have to let them sit for a few hours, and then we would hear them up on the floor, and then we just did that process over and over and over this last week. It was just really pretty brutal. But anyway, Senator Bush was very, very nice on the phone. He said, "Why didn't you come to me and talk to me about this? Why didn't you come to me and talk to me about this? You know, I mean, I've been hearing that your office has been putting out all this stuff saying we're not going to introduce that legislation. You know, it's on 1405 now." In my mind, because you guys don't listen to us. Every time we try to do something, you smack us down. Everything we do, you try to smack down. And I told other legislators, I said, "Do you trust us?" They said, "No." In other words, us, meaning Kurt and Isley and myself. They said, "No." I said, "Do you think I trust you guys?" The other rep said to me, he had to think about it. He goes, "No." I said, "Exactly." I said, "So how in the world am I supposed to get any assurance that we introduce language and that you're going to do something with it?" I mean, I'm sorry, but that's kind of like a duh. I had to explain that to him. I'm like, really? Anyway, I'm going to fast forward. 1405, I'm thrilled. It got passed.
Yay.
Well, I'm sorry. It still has to go to the governor's desk for signature. So it's gone through the Senate. Just, I don't know. I'm not sure. I have a hard... I would be really stunned if the governor is going to not sign that piece of legislation with the Senate and the House already signing off on that. Yes, if he does veto it, we can override. So yes, yeah, exactly. So that's still a possibility. Yeah, I'm going to get to that in a second. So we tried to do another one. I'm sorry, I'll get to another. We tried to pass another amendment. It was called fetal harm. So we were trying to find creative ways to introduce legislation that would protect the preborn. There was a bill for fetal mutilation. I'm sorry, female genital mutilation that was in a specific House bill. We tried to amend that bill. It wasn't? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting two bills confused. Anyway, yes, I'm sorry, it was. There was a criminal bill. We tried to amend the criminal bill to make fetal harm a crime. We didn't use the word abortion. We just said that it is illegal to poison, dismember, burn, I believe, or harm a preborn child in any way that would result in their harm or essentially, I think, in their death. So that was somewhat of the paraphrase of the amendment. Again, it was struck down. We did another one on COVID vaccination passports. Again, that one was struck down. But again, just like Baby Rivers, because of our pressure, because of the profiling, and because of angry voters calling legislators, they found a home. Wow, amazing. For COVID vaccination passports. It's not the best. I mean, honestly, I think the language we had was better that we had, but it does at least put the restraints on government. I think people were asking, what about businesses? What about employees? That's a real tension with the issue of liberty. You can take your business elsewhere. I mean, I'm a small business owner. Do we really want to start dictating what businesses can do? Because businesses are owned by people. So, make sure I'm not missing any other ones. There were other interesting conversations, and I can talk about them with you personally. I want to wrap it up. There was the telehealth bill that I talked about. I had already done my initial speech on that one. When it came back through the House again with an amendment, I said, I'm not going to vote for this bill. The same reason I didn't vote for it the first time. One of the other reps, he literally came up behind me because as people were getting up to speak on this bill, he knew I was going to jump up and give another scathing speech. I was really, really taken aback. He literally he was trying to restrain, he didn't physically restrain me, but literally was coming over to me to plead with me as to whether or not, if this is what God would really have me to do. Yes, this is what God would have me to do. I mean, I'm not going to plumb out a lot of the scriptures, but I mean, abortion is murder. It is child sacrifice. Brian had the verse from Proverbs 24 up here, 11 and 12. Deliver those who are being taken away to death. The Bible says, open your mouth for all the rights of the unfortunate. For the little rendering there, I believe, is actually the sons of death. If these aren't the sons and daughters of death, I don't know who is. We each have a mouth. We have a voice. We need to use the platform that we have. I've given a lot of information here. And ultimately, I wasn't wanting to give the information just to regurgitate what happened in the session. I'm hoping that each of you will take the platform that you have and that you'll use it to maximum use. Use it to maximum use to honor and glorify God. Bring the gospel into play with it. Bring the gospel into light with it. Many of these legislators claim to know Christ. And I told them over and over, boy, you guys say you're Christians, but you guys sure don't vote like you're Christians. I want to see abortion abolished, and I know everybody here does as well. We need more principled legislators. I am really, really appreciative to everybody here and to the people that are listening, to the people of my district. God bless you, sir. The people of my district who voted me into office, I'm really grateful. I'm grateful to the people of the state of Indiana that have been praying for myself, and for my wife, and for our political team, for Kurt and Isley and Mary. I am so grateful for your prayers, and I am needy. And if any of you monitor my personal page, you know that I'm asking for prayer all the time when I'm getting up to speak, because I really, I don't like to get up and speak. I really don't. I'm thankful for the encouragement from everybody. I wish, my wife knows this, because Brian, I keep on bringing up Brian blows up my social media page. I was trying to keep up with comments and everything else. It's like, I can't even, there's no way I can keep up with everything. So please forgive me if I'm not responding back to comments on there. It's just, there are so many, and especially during session, there was no way I could keep up with everything. But I just want people here, people that are listening, to know how grateful I am for the encouragement, the prayers, the help, the phone calls, the emails, and we all have a part to play. Every single one of us has a part to play in this whole process. We need other legislators who are principled, who will have backbones of steel, will not give in to the establishment, will not give in and set their face like flint, no matter what, that are not interested in a political position, but are interested in doing what's right and realizing, and as I've told the legislators over and over, do you guys not realize that we will have to give an account for every decision that we're making in this legislative chamber, aside from the $37.5 billion budget, which I won't even go off on a rant on that whole thing, which I voted against. We are stealing from our kids and our grandkids. We are stealing. Thou shalt not steal. Yeah, I thought that's a commandment. And that's exactly what we're doing, because we're borrowing money from them. We're digging into their pockets, into our kids' pockets, our grandkids' pockets, our great-grandkids' pockets, and we're bankrupting our nation. And that's a whole other issue here I could spend hours talking about that I won't get off on. I don't have a grand finale here, other than I just want to thank everybody for coming out today, and I'm going to stick around, and if you got questions or if you want to talk, I mean, please come up. I don't want to leave it to Brian to wrap up.
Thank you, John.
Praise the Lord. Thank you, Brother John. Man, it's been a blessing to see this whole thing play out.